Hello everybody. In this video, I will be sharing with you my testimony on how Christ has come into my life. And I decided to do this because earlier today, I was sharing it with two of my good friends. Both of them, I guess, didn't really truly believe in religion-ish. And after sharing my testimony with them, I just felt a deep sense of peace. And I knew then that I would have to, share my testimony more often, and what better way to do that than on this platform. So here goes. Starting from the very start, I was born a cradle Catholic in Singapore, and my faith has always been a tumultuous journey. It has been full of ups and downs, but then again, that is what life is, right? When I was young, all the way actually, all my successes used to be attributed to God's grace. So when I did well for my PSLE, which were my primary school leaving examinations, my parents would attribute it to God's grace. When I did well for my O-levels, God's grace. When I did, alright for my A-levels, again, God's grace. And it was never really any of my own doing, despite the amount of hard work I put into it. And it really put me off because my ego has always been really huge, to be fair. Yeah. And so when all of my achievements got attributed to God's grace, I began to really dislike this guy, this God, because he was stealing my spotlight, And at the tender age of 12, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I think, what is today my biggest regret, because it is my only regret. I don't regret anything else. And this is what happened. So after I finished my PSLE, I had the option of going to either SJI, St. Joseph's Institution, which was a Catholic school, or Zhonghua Secondary School, which, as the name suggests, is a Chinese school, more secular. And being from SJI Junior School, I was more inclined to go to its senior school because all my friends were going there as well. And I was working so hard for PSLE just to get into that school, to, I guess, join my friends there. And my parents posed me a deal. They said that if you choose Zhonghua Secondary School over St. Joseph's Institution, we, as in both of them, would give you the difference in the school fees every month. And this was massive because Zhonghua is a government school, so the school fees per month would be around $8-ish. It's just an estimate. And those from SGI would be around $300. So essentially, I would be getting around $300 a month for 4 years. And I thought about it for the longest time, and I caved into money. I chose money. And I think it still remains to be the biggest regret of my life, because that was how God taught me that you never really choose money over Him, because money is honestly a relative term, whereas it doesn't bring you joy, unlike God. And so, I lived a secular life as a Sunday Catholic in Zhonghua. And a lot of the time, I was quite embarrassed to tell other people where I was from, what school I was from. And I actually stopped going to church for quite some time in secondary school and junior college because I thought that church was a waste of time. I went to St. Andrew's Junior College. It was a Christian school, and I was very happy that I guess, could finally choose which school to go to without external pressure from, external sources like my parents. And but that didn't really change much, to be fair. Didn't change much about my faith. At the end of JC2, I went for the Awaken retreat. And at this retreat, I still didn't believe in God. I found it hard to grasp the concept that, there was an omnipotent being out there, because he was truly so distant and really the most intangible figure. You cannot really feel God, right? And so, during the camp, my mom actually had to drag me to attend it, because at that point, my cousins from New Zealand were over here in Singapore. And I told her, I remember telling her, Mom, why can't I go for this camp some other year? Our cousins don't come over that often anyway. It is not like we see them very often, and yeah, time is a luxury after all. But she insisted, and so I went. During this camp, they asked all of us what we wanted to get out of this camp. And I knew what I wanted, because I didn't even believe in God. And so I offered up this prayer to really want to get to know whether this God existed or not. And on the third day of the camp, we had this praying over session when the Archbishop of Singapore came over and prayed over all of us in a room while we were singing praise and worship songs. And so before the entire thing happened, I vaguely remember him saying, "Do not resist if you feel anything, because, do not resist," basically. And so when he came over to my turn, or when he came over to me, I wasn't aware of my surroundings because I was too consumed really singing praise and worship songs. They are, I guess, my weakness in the faith. And so as he was praying over me, I felt this force, this gentle force, pushing me down. And it was quite strange, because nobody was touching me. And so, as I felt myself leaning backwards, I decided to resist, because it didn't make sense to me how I was just slowly easing back, despite no physical contact being exerted on me. So I resisted, I stood back up, and then he moved on from me. And he went to other people. And I continued singing. And after a while, I looked around, and I realized that everybody around me was on the ground. And that was then I broke down, because this was how God really revealed his existence to me. I mean, there really is no other way to, I guess, explain how I was feeling at that point in time, because it was just such an overwhelming feeling as a non-believer, seeing everybody around you succumb and just let God, I guess, lay them down on the ground. And it was terrifying, to be honest, but that was definitely one of the turning points in my life when I truly believed that God was real. And so after that retreat, I entered the army, and the army is a very secular place. Everyone in the army uses vulgarities. A lot of people just have no moral compass. And so I found it very hard to, I guess, maintain my faith. There was nobody around me to really share this faith with, and I lost my faith in the army. So I was a very secular person. Yeah, back then. Used to, I guess, swear regularly because it was a norm. It was considered a norm. And yeah, there was no God for me back then in those 2 years. Also in the army, I went on a holiday with 3 of my friends from the army as well. We went to Okinawa, and on the second day of our trip, as we were driving along the expressway, about to make a right turn, we got into what I would say has been the scariest physical experience of my life, a car crash. So what happened was, we were traveling along the expressway this way, and we were making a right turn, and my friend who wasn't looking at the road but was looking at the GPS just kept going, and a lorry plowed into us, plowed into the car door, my car door in particular, and that the entire car got moved by the lorry, by the impact, and all the windows shattered, and the car door dented inwards, and glass shards were everywhere. And at that point in time, I remember feeling really scared. I was literally trembling in my seat. As I looked up, I could just feel blood dripping from my face. And it was just terror beyond, I guess, words. And I remember I couldn't open the car door, and so I had to climb out of my friend's seat, the driver's seat. And I got out of the accident with not only my life, but without any major injuries. I guess I only had a few cuts on my eyeballs, but that was about it. And I guess I have to acknowledge that is where my acute fear of death really stems from. And I also acknowledge that God gave me a second chance at life on that day, because He probably thought, man, it's not your time yet. Your time will come, but it's not on that day. And yeah, I thought this story would be pivotal in this testimony, but I forgot to put it in, so this is a clip. So after that, towards the end of the army, I fell into a period of bitterness when I fractured my wrist because I could no longer hit the gym. To me, it was an avenue to vent my frustrations. So, being in the army, I guess there was a lot of internal conflict, there was a lot of anxiety and, I guess, worry because of, human brokenness. I think that's the best way to put it, right? Why else would there be anxiety and worry in your life? And so I used to go to the gym to just vent my frustration, and I thought this was a really, I guess, positive way to go about dealing with this. And I became really reliant on the gym. And so, when I could no longer, I guess, get the gains, I just felt quite helpless. And since there was no more avenue to vent any frustration, I just had a lot of it pent up within me. And when I recovered at the end of February this year, I decided to go back to the gym. And it was a really liberating feeling, but that's not the point, you know? And so I entered my first part-time job in at the end of February. And I decided to also start meditating in the morning by just saying a short prayer, thanking God for the day, thanking God for giving me life before the entire day started. It really helped to set the tone for each day. And I experienced peace for the first time in what felt to be a really, really long time, because I hadn't truly experienced, I guess, God's love in what could be years since the retreat, you know? So I also learned that with peace came joy. And while working, I was also taking driving lessons. And there was one day when I texted my driving instructor to, I guess, ask when the next lesson was going to be. He told me that one of his students had contracted the coronavirus and that she had her lesson directly before mine. And I guess at this point, I was feeling quite anxious because there was a pretty high chance that he himself had contracted the virus and passed it on to me. So as a result, my parents decided to isolate me in my aunt's apartment because she was taking care of her elderly parents. And this was a turning point. So I guess a bit more background. I have 3 siblings, and I stay with my parents, my grandmother, and our helper. And there are a total of about 8 people living at home. And so there's always somebody to talk to. I'm never really truly alone, you know? And so going into this self-isolation, I truly felt that it was going to be very sian, which means very, I guess, boring. What is the way to put it? You know? Okay, anyway, I went into it thinking that I would be lonely and that there wouldn't be anything to do. But it proved to be the best 10 days of my life. And so during this period of self-isolation, I truly had a lot of time to think about a lot of things, because when you are alone, you only have your thoughts to accompany you. And so I thought about my life. I thought about my dreams, my goals, my aspirations. And a lot of them revolved around, I guess, fulfilling material needs, material wants, like buying a big house, owning a nice car, I guess, earning a lot of money, you know. And the more I thought about that, the more empty I felt. I couldn't explain it, but it was as if these pursuits were meaningless. And I thought about it some more. And it made sense, because at the end of the day, the end point for every single individual on this earth is death. Whether you are a king, a president, Bill Gates, you know, everyone meets death eventually. And none of this material wealth can truly be taken with you to the grave. So, at the end of the day, it seems so futile to chase after these desires. And I just felt so empty inside. So, this also, I guess, leads to my crippling fear of death. I think the reason why I find death so scary is because death is truly the greatest unknown. Nobody has truly died and come back from the dead, lives to tell the tale, except for Jesus Christ. And a lot of the time, Jesus feels really distant from us, especially if we don't believe, if we don't take that first step out in faith. And so, death to me was an unending darkness. It was like when I pictured death, all I could think of was darkness, and there was zero light. There was no light at all, and it scared me because then life on earth became so meaningless, right? Why are we created to live, say, 70 to 80 odd years, assuming no accidents happen, only to cease to exist after, only to pursue material desires and to cease to exist after that? It just didn't make sense to me. And so I began my pursuit for, I guess, something to help me to conquer this fear of death. And ultimately, this led me to God. Because God says that there is an afterlife, there is heaven, and there is hell. And so I found it very hard to believe this because, heaven and hell, my human mind cannot properly envision this afterlife. But I decided I had nothing to lose, and I had nothing but time as well. So during this period of quarantine, I began to do Bible plans. And I also began to really talk to both my cousin Augustine and my godbrother Lionel about the faith. And I did this every day. And at first I didn't feel anything. Nothing changed, but I was determined to, I guess, I was a man on a mission in that sense. I wanted to establish a relationship with God, and I had to do that before I died. If not, I really couldn't find meaning in life. And it was on the 5th day when I was having a video call with Augustine, and I told him that I felt something in the room. Somebody was in the room with me. And that was crazy because I was living alone, and when I looked around, there truly was nobody in the room with me. But when you can feel another presence with you in the room. So I told him about it. I said, "Hey, Augie, I feel like there's somebody else in this room. What should I do?" And he told me, I think that's just the Holy Spirit. And I guess at that point, I was freaking out because, something's quite supernatural lah. It's supernatural, and our human intellect cannot fully fathom this thing. So I just sat there, I guess, looking at him until the sensation slowly, I guess, faded away. And after that, I had a lot of time to reflect on it, and I realized that fear wasn't the only thing I felt. It was also awe, and I guess a deep sense of amazement and gratitude. And so every day to me just seemed like a new day after that. And I found new meaning. I found, I guess, purpose. And I guess this reinvigorated my desire to want to know God better. So I guess you could call it a major turning point in my life. And then I got fired from my job, and this was over some really stupid trivial prank that I pulled. And I thought that this would affect me greatly because, you know, when you get fired from your job, usually you aren't happy about it and you dwell on it for quite some time. And so I thought that I would be affected by it. And I let it sit in for a couple of hours, and I realized that I really wasn't, because I had changed so much over the past month that I was so full of joy, and I couldn't be bothered to, you know, really face. How do I put it across? Not that I couldn't be bothered, but more like I could just. I just saw it as an opportunity to do something greater for God. And so I began to journal because I had so much more time on my hands without my job. And it is through this journaling experience, it's been a week, and this week has been so insightful because it is through this journaling experience which I have deepened my faith so much, and I've learned so much more, that I think now I can at least 50% say that I believe that, you know, there is a heaven. And I just felt this calling to share my testimony because I've watched so many testimonies this past week, and I guess this past month, that I acknowledge the power of a testimony and what it can do to an individual. So if if my testimony has helped you at all, that's good. But, you know, if not, then sorry for wasting your time. Peace.